Well, I thought I would give a more detailed account of the founding of MCC. Maybe do a series of short videos so you'll really have the whole history with as best as I can remember. Like I said in this short blip I did for your 40th anniversary, it began in Seattle. Bob Sirico had been a nationally known child evangelist, fundamentalist, and grown out of that and discovered that he was gay and met Troy Perry somewhere along the line and went to Seattle and started an MCC church. There were, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 MCC groups. It was way back when, you know. And I got interested in it through Irvin, who knew about it, and went to a Sunday service and really liked it. It was well done. It was clearly not the liturgical structure I was used to as a Roman Catholic, but, you know, the MCC hadn't developed the way it was going to do communion or its order of... none of that had been decided yet. I mean, they had ministers who'd come from the few ministers that existed came from every denomination imaginable and agreed about nothing. Oh, I remember those doctrinal committees we all sat on, and taking input from our congregations and trying to come up with confessions of faith and doctrinal beliefs that we could all embrace. Oy vey, what a job that was. Because it just didn't exist. And most of us didn't think MCC was going to need to be around for longer than 5, 8 years, 10 max. Because by that time the other denominations would see that we could genuinely be Christians, that the scriptures really didn't teach that we couldn't be Christians, and it would all be over with and everybody'd go back to their own denominations. Well, at any rate, Troy comes to Seattle, and Irv's going to have a nice dinner for him. Irv owns a big mansion. He's got money. And I'm maybe 27 years old, like that, something all through university, and I own a home on Lake Washington, and I think I was just breaking up with the third lover of my life. And at any rate, so Irv invited me to dinner, and Troy mentioned at dinner that what he wanted to do was to plan for an evangelizing group to go through the Midwest, cross across America in the summer of the next year, which was maybe 72, maybe 73, I don't remember, and end up at a conference he wanted to hold outside of Atlanta, Georgia, which is Decatur, in the town of Decatur. And all the MCCers rather, would come to it, who were interested in helping develop it. Is it going to have a 5-year plan, a 4-year plan, a rudimentary kind of conference? And an amazing amount of people showed up. I was surprised. And he wanted this group to go across America, kind of finding out whether other cities were ripe for someone to come to town and start an MCC church. So he wanted us to, go through Boise and Missoula and Rapid City and Omaha and Fargo and Des Moines and Kansas City and, all that. That's what he wanted the tour to do. And he had no money, He was still living with his mom in those days. Well, he had that cute little lover. I forget what his name was now. And because he didn't have a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of in those days. Uh, and he was looking for people who could fund themselves or get people to fund them to do this, and end up at that conference to give kind of a report. So, I, having been stationed in the Air Force out here, knew what summers were like in the Midwest, and I said, yeah, you're not going to get me out in the Midwest in the summertime without an air-conditioned Winnebago. In fact, that's my fleece to the Lord. And I thought, it's a great idea, but I own a house, and I'm ready to get a job at a university or something, and well, the next morning, Bobby calls me and says, you're never going to guess what Irv Olson bought today. I said, I haven't a clue. He can afford almost anything. He bought an air-conditioned Winnebago. So we started making plans, blah, blah, blah. I made the plans, set up things with the presses, and called ahead and got places for us to meet in for a single stop meeting. We decided to have, we had Irv was gonna go and play the piano. He's a great piano player, and the minister was dating a wonderful tenor. He was going to come along and sing, and I would do the business end of it, contact the TV stations, blah blah blah. And we decorated up the Winnebago, MCC or bust, and off we took. And we came through Omaha and several other places. And I felt a real calling. Well, here's the backstory you don't know. How I really ended up here. I mean, I did feel called here, but Bobby and the tenor were in the process of breaking up. That began just a couple of weeks before we were finally organized enough to make the trip. Certainly way too deep into it to try to get somebody else who could be away from their home for an entire summer to sing for us, because we had every service planned, a certain thing, a certain blah, blah, blah. And I wasn't aware that Irv had become such a heavy drinker. And they had hired or were bringing along somebody to be the gopher, to do the laundry at the laundromat and go get the burgers. And this was a guy who really had nothing to do for the summer, didn't have a job. As long as he had a place to sleep, and the Winnebago, I think, slept 8. He had a place to sleep and food, and could get to a gay bar occasionally, he would be delighted to make the trip with us. And you have never met a nullier man. I don't remember his name anymore. Oh my goodness, you just cannot imagine. And on top of that, what you call a slut. Oh, boy, he sure embarrassed us a lot of times. Well, so Bobby and the tenor bickering, and the gopher doing the can down the middle of the aisle of the Winnebago, and also maybe at Safeway. And several hot little arguments and fights, and I would get very nervous when Irv was going to drive, because I knew he was drinking vodka that nobody else knew about. And I didn't think we'd ever get through all the cities or to Atlanta. Now, we were pulling behind them my little Volkswagen Bug behind us, so that when we got to a city, we could park, the Winnebago someplace, trailer park or something, and then get around and do everything we had to do, because there was a lot to do. You had to go to gay bars, talk about the service. There was so much to do. We talked with the press. So by the time we got to Atlanta, we were so sick of each other. We could barely pray together, and I mean, sometimes you pray through clenched teeth, right? So I decided, since all we were going to do when the conference was over was get back to Washington, the last thing I wanted to do was be trapped in that air-conditioned Winnebago with the slut. And by now, Bobby and the tenor were doing everything but boxing each other in the aisle. And Irv was sort of drinking, was rather public about the drinking. And I just decided, I've got my Volkswagen here. I think I'm going to go back to Omaha. Because I had friends here. That's one of the reasons I was really happy to come here. In fact, we stayed at her home, Joe Holmes. She eventually became the first treasurer of the church. And she just died, actually, a couple of years ago. And so I thought, well, I'll go visit Joe on my way back to Washington. I'll just take my Volkswagen and get the hell out of here. So the conference was over. We did, and actually we gave a very good report. Every city did seem like we might be able to get something going, a study group at least. So I imagine if we'd stopped, at other places, it might have been the same story. The town had to be a certain size. So I went back to Omaha and gave Troy a call and told him what had happened. And I had chatted with him several times at the conference, and he knew that I was disgruntled about them. And told him that I felt kind of called here, and did he think I should pursue anything? And oh yeah, of course he did. So I started calling places to see if we could I could rent some space. And Joe said I could stay with her, and in fact turned over one of the bedrooms. Eventually we had office space at her house. And first people I talked to were the Unitarians, of course, and they had been delighted to provide a space for us for this one-time freedom of speech and opportunity to explain who we were about, but they didn't feel that they could commit their space regularly, since it was their space and I used it pretty often. I went to every other major, what I hoped was a progressive church, beat on the doors, got appointments with their ministers. Oh my goodness, I got preached at, some people got angry at, and of course all I got were no's. So I went back to the Unitarians and pleaded again with Reverend Banstrom and told him, explained to him that I didn't want to get a storefront at that point, didn't want to meet in a library basement, that I really wanted it to be a facility that looked like and felt like a church, so that they would have the feeling, the emotionality that I felt that they needed, and I feel the kind of permanence that a church sanctuary would bring. And he agreed and talked to his board, and his board didn't like the idea, and he called with apologies, and I said, well, maybe if I come and talk to the board, and he said, okay. They held another meeting, and I went down and talked to the board. The board presented it to the congregation. The congregation decided they wanted to meet with me and ask questions, because after all, queers are wanting to use the building regularly. So I went to them and I spoke to them about what MCC was all about, and believe me, as I said, it was, it's in its early history, but it's still, we had a vision, and I could explain the vision and the hope and the need, and then they were free to ask any question they wanted to. And then one old man in the back, pardon me, stood up and he said, I've just been thinking here, Sure think everybody should have freedom of speech and be able to worship God if they want to. Don't know why anybody'd want to. Of course, they're atheists, most of them, and agnostics at the Unitarian Church. What I can't figure out what it is you people do in bed that's so enjoyable you're willing to put up with all this crap. What is it you do in bed that's so enjoyable you'll put up with all this crap? So I said, well, sir, we do everything you do to make it enjoyable, except we don't get pregnant. And they all laughed, and he laughed. And that sort of really broke the ice. So it was a good question. And then, of course, then I left, and the congregation discussed it without me, and I would get a phone call the next day. And the next day I did, and they decided they would rent the facility to us. We could use it on a Sunday after their service was over, which meant we would have church at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Not bad for people who've been out all night dancing on a Saturday night. And I had a couple of weeks. I had to really organize and work hard then. So I was in the bars everywhere. We had the Rendezvous in those days, the Cave, a piano bar. None of the bars that are here now were here then. And I had a list that I got when we came through in July of people who would be interested in getting involved. And I called, and everybody got those people together for a meeting at Joe's house. And what I needed was, I needed a lot of things to get a church service together. I needed a pianist, an organist. So we advertised a coffee hour in the basement of the church for anyone interested in discussing this and getting it started. And I would say 20, 25 people actually showed up for that. Some of them only out of curiosity. Some of them would never have joined MCC and never came to any of the services. And I told them, look, we're going to need a pianist. I need an organist. I need, the works. Well, there was a fellow there by the name of John Kirkland who was the choir master for Zion's Baptist Church, a well-known choir in this city. He said he would build a choir, and he would solo beautiful fire baritone voice until we had a choir. And there was a Chuck Miller who came to the meeting, who was the organist and pianist at St. Cecilia's Cathedral. And he said, but from a Southern Baptist background, so he could also play gospel music as well as the great anthems. And he said he would play, and they would volunteer these until and if there was money to pay them, because Lord knows I wasn't getting paid by anybody. And we got together and we put together our first Sunday service. We advertised it as well as we could. We got the news to cover it, the paper to cover it, the Sun and the Omaha World Herald and Channel 3. I mentioned it in the news because it was shocking. Homosexuals going to get together at the Unitarian Church. God knows what they're going to be doing in there. And things just began to bubble along. The first thing you know, a young man by the name of Richard Shields came to me. He was thinking that he might be gay. He was a student at Creighton. He actually became our first deacon. He is now an Episcopal priest. Was in an Episcopal monastery for years, a missionary in South America for years. He's now being an Episcopal priest in Hawaii. Poor dear. Still in contact with Richard after all these years. And he got a group going on Creighton. Great dialogue, and all through the Creighton newspaper and everything, of gays on that campus trying to get together for discussion groups and the struggle with, it made wonderful news. Everybody was talking about the Creighton queers. And UNO got interested, and we ended up having a huge conference on human sexuality because the fundamentalists were so in the news all the time about how wrong we were. Troy came out for that big conference. It was pretty incredible, pretty interesting. I can't remember that minister's name. He's been dead for a long time. But I always laughed because his last name was one of the false gods of the Samarites or something. And my last name, of course, comes out of the word Melchizedek, which is a priesthood, a rabbinical priesthood. At any rate, the church, a lot of people like that. Jamie Kelly came out one night. She was a student at the College of St. Mary. So a lot of young people got interested, growing up American youth. Randy Gillenwater, I think he was a junior in high school, and he got interested. In fact, he was the first president of Growing American Youth. Died of AIDS before the good medicine came along. Darrell Cole, computer genius, first president of your board, died of AIDS in my arms. John Kirkland, that wonderful choir director, died of AIDS. We lost a lot of people. And the time came for the church to charter. It's a huge event. And we began to organize for that. And I'll make a second video about that. The chartering of MCC Omaha. And there's some funny stories I need to tell you, too, that went on. You know, it wasn't all tribulation, although there was a great deal of tribulation, death threats, and all that kind of stuff. Oh, my. Can't believe how mean people can be. And mean-spirited. And often holding a Bible in one hand or a rosary in the other. But there was some funny times, just hysterical things that happened. So on the next video, I'll give you some of the humor and then talk about the chartering service and what a really big event it was in this town.